Have you ever noticed how some people brush their teeth every single day and still live with bad breath, a white-coated tongue, and constant cavities as if that's just how life is supposed to be? As if their mouth simply decided that was its final form. For a long time, I thought these problems were just part of being an adult. I woke up every morning with that unpleasant taste sitting heavy in my mouth, felt my tongue thick and coated before I even had a chance to say good morning to anyone, and no matter how carefully I followed what everyone called a correct hygiene routine, something always fell off. Something invisible. Something persistent. And the strangest part wasn't even what was happening to me. It was looking around and realizing the same thing was happening to almost everyone I knew. People who carried a toothbrush in their bag. People who used mouthwash multiple times a day. People who spent real money on premium toothpaste with promises printed in bold letters across the packaging. And yet those same people still covered their mouths when they laughed, still turned their heads slightly when speaking close to someone, still felt that quiet, uncomfortable awareness that something wasn't quite right. And that started to genuinely bother me. Because if everybody brushes their teeth, why does everybody still seem to suffer from the same problems? At first I assumed it was genetic. Some people just had worse bacteria, right? Then I thought maybe it was diet. Too much sugar, too much acidity, not enough water. But the more I paid attention, the more I started to notice a silent pattern happening every single morning in millions of bathrooms, a habit so automatic, so deeply ingrained since childhood, that nobody ever stopped to question it. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Most people learned how to take care of their teeth when they were children. Brush, rinse, spit, and move on with the day. Everything on autopilot. No one ever really explained how the natural balance of the mouth actually works. No one sat down and said, look, there's an entire ecosystem living inside your mouth right now, and the way you treat it every morning determines whether that ecosystem stays in balance or slowly starts to collapse. Nobody said that. So nobody knew. And because nobody knew, billions of people have been repeating the same small daily mistakes for decades, completely unaware that those mistakes might be feeding the very problems they're trying to solve. That's what pushed me to start researching. Deeply, obsessively, if I'm being honest. I started reading about oral bacteria, about the microbial environment of the mouth, about tongue coating, about the relationship between what happens in those first few minutes after waking up and the long-term health of teeth and gums. I talked to people. I looked at studies. I read reports from dentists and microbiologists who were asking questions that most toothpaste commercials would never dare bring up. And one discovery stopped me completely. Most oral problems don't start in the teeth. They start in the tongue. That whitish, sometimes yellowish layer that coats the tongue every morning, the one most people barely glance at before brushing, isn't just a harmless cosmetic thing. In many cases, it represents a dense accumulation of anaerobic bacteria, dead cells, food debris, and metabolic byproducts that have been quietly building up overnight while you slept. The tongue, with all its tiny papillae and textured surface, creates the perfect warm, humid, low-oxygen environment for these microorganisms to thrive. And here's what makes it more serious than people realize. Those bacteria don't just stay on the tongue. They release volatile sulfur compounds, the primary chemical culprits behind bad breath. They alter the pH of the oral environment. They shift the balance between beneficial and harmful microorganisms throughout the entire mouth. And over time, when that balance is repeatedly disrupted, the consequences start to show up everywhere. In the gums, in the enamel, in the sensitivity of the teeth, and in that persistent feeling that no matter how much you clean, something still isn't right. The most alarming thing is that most people try to deal with this by masking it. Gum. Breath sprays. Ultra-strong mouthwashes used 4 times a day. Quick solutions that cover the signal without ever addressing the source. And the problem with covering a signal is that the underlying issue doesn't disappear. It continues. Quietly. Consistently. Day after day. The mouth loses balance. The harmful bacteria multiply. The breath gets worse. The acid levels in the mouth rise. The enamel starts to weaken in ways too gradual to notice immediately. And small cavities begin appearing, one after another, as if from nowhere. What shocked me the most was discovering that some habits considered completely normal, even responsible, can actually make all of this significantly worse without the person ever suspecting it. Because there's an enormous difference between cleaning the mouth and destabilizing it. A lot of people wake up and immediately attack their mouths with highly aggressive products, excessive scrubbing, or certain timing habits that strip away not just residue and bacteria, but also part of the natural protective layer the mouth produces to maintain its own health. Saliva, for instance, is far more sophisticated than most people give it credit for. It contains antimicrobial proteins, enzymes, and minerals that actively work to keep the oral environment balanced. When you consistently interfere with that process, especially during the critical morning window, you may be removing protection your mouth actually needs. Over time, this can contribute to increased sensitivity, greater bacterial proliferation, gum irritation, and gradual enamel erosion that happens so slowly you don't notice it until it's already significantly advanced. And your body signals this constantly. The problem is we've been taught to ignore the signals. Waking up with bad breath became normal. Having a white tongue every morning became normal. That stale, sour taste before brushing became normal. Sitting in a dentist's chair for the same recurring treatments became normal. But what if it isn't? What if those symptoms aren't just inevitable facts of human existence, but rather consistent warnings from a system that's been out of balance for a very long time? That was the shift that changed everything for me. Because when you stop treating symptoms as permanent facts and start treating them as information, a completely different picture begins to emerge. The recurring cavity isn't bad luck. The persistent bad breath isn't just who you are. The white tongue every morning isn't something you have to simply accept. These things are messages. The body's way of pointing towards something that has been repeatedly disrupted without being corrected. And once I started speaking to specialists, reading through studies on oral microbiota, and listening to people who had spent years hiding their smiles and whispering apologies about their breath, people who genuinely believed their problem was impossible to solve, the pattern became undeniable. Most of them weren't suffering from a lack of hygiene. They were suffering from a lack of understanding about how the mouth actually works. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else. Because the mouth is not a sterile environment that needs to be aggressively sanitized twice a day. It's a living ecosystem. A dynamic, constantly shifting community of microorganisms, some beneficial, some harmful, that coexist in a delicate balance. When that balance is maintained, the mouth does extraordinary things on its own. It neutralizes acids, fights off harmful bacteria, remineralizes tiny surface damage on enamel, and maintains the conditions that support healthy gums and fresh breath. When that balance is repeatedly disrupted, especially during the morning hours when bacterial load is naturally at its highest after a night of reduced saliva flow, the environment shifts. The harmful bacteria gain an advantage. The protective mechanisms weaken, and the consequences accumulate slowly, invisibly, over months and years. This is why some people seem to do everything right and still end up in the same place, because doing everything right according to what we were taught isn't the same as doing everything right according to how the mouth actually functions. There are timing factors most people never consider. There are sequencing habits that seem logical, but can work against the mouth's natural repair cycles. There are products, some of them widely recommended and marketed with scientific-sounding language, that when used in excess or at the wrong moments, can alter the microbiome in ways that create more problems than they solve. And there are far simpler, more intelligent approaches that work with the biology of the mouth rather than against it. That's what began to change things for the people I spoke with. Not more products, not more aggressive routines, not more chemicals and more force, but a genuine understanding of what the mouth needs, when it needs it, and what actually helps versus what merely feels like it should be helping. The results, when you apply that understanding consistently, are striking. The tongue starts looking cleaner, not because you're scraping it harder, but because the bacterial environment producing that coating is being properly addressed at the source. The breath improves, not temporarily, not for 20 minutes after rinsing, but throughout the day, because the microbial balance that produces odor compounds is being corrected. The sense of heaviness and unpleasantness upon waking gradually diminishes. And that quiet, low-grade social anxiety that comes from constantly wondering whether someone standing close to you can smell what you can't stop being aware of, that starts to fade too. Not because of a miracle, not because of a magic product or an overnight transformation, but because, finally, the actual cause is being addressed instead of the surface symptom. That's what nobody explains in simple terms. Not the toothpaste commercials, not the quick listicles, not the generic dentist advice that hasn't fundamentally changed in 50 years. The conversation about oral health almost never includes the ecosystem, the timing, the bacteria on the tongue, the morning window, the microbiome, the balance between protection and disruption. It stays on the surface, literally. And so millions of people keep brushing harder, buying stronger products, covering their mouths in conversations, and privately believing that this is simply the body they were born into, when the reality is that their body has been trying to tell them something for years. Something about imbalance. Something about excess. Something about the difference between aggressive cleaning and intelligent care. If you've read this far and recognized yourself in any of what was described here, the recurring bad breath, the white tongue, the sensitivity, the constant cycle of cavities, the social discomfort, then maybe this is the moment to pay attention to what your own mouth has been quietly signaling. Because the biggest discovery was never just that there was a silent mistake happening every morning. The biggest discovery was understanding that so many people suffer for years believing this is simply normal, when in reality, there's a completely logical explanation for all of it. And when you finally understand that explanation, something shifts. You stop fighting your own body. You start working with it. And you realize that taking care of your mouth was never supposed to feel like a losing battle. It was supposed to feel like balance. Because when you learn to care for your mouth by respecting the way it naturally works, the results go far beyond fresher breath or stronger teeth. You stop hiding your smile. You stop calculating the distance between you and the person you're talking to. You stop spending mental energy on something that used to follow you everywhere. You just live. And you smile without thinking about it. If this opened your eyes in any way, subscribe to the channel now. Because in the next videos, I'll keep sharing discoveries that most people should have learned years ago, but nobody ever explained in a way that actually made sense.